Hi there, everybody. This is Wendy Hernandez, and welcome back for another episode of the Family Law Insider podcast. Today's guest is somebody who's really exciting for me to host because she is a quilt artist, an author, a creativity coach, a retreat hostess, and a spiritual companion. And creativity and spirituality are two of the things that I'm passionate about in my life. Creativity is something that I think everybody has within them that not everybody recognizes. And if people could really tap into that and get into touch with their creativity, they could just do fantastic things in their lives and elevate themselves to a different level, both in their relationships and just where they go personally. So the guest I have with us today, Chris Smith, is an expert in that, and not only that, but she used to be an attorney. So I'm kind of interested in hearing her story about how she transitioned from being an attorney to a creativity coach. So thank you, Chris, for being here, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's my pleasure.
So, Chris, we were talking a little bit off the air about the fact that you were once an attorney. And, as an attorney myself, I often hear people saying, well, I'm not really that creative. And I actually think there's a lot of creativity that's involved in being an attorney. But can you tell us your story about why you decided to be an attorney and why you stopped?
Sure. I decided in my 20s I was primarily working in real estate, and I worked with a lot of attorneys because I was in Connecticut and they required attorneys to close every house sale. So I worked with attorneys, and at the end of the 20s I went through a divorce, and I realized I was going to have to be able to support myself for the rest of my life. And real estate was in a down, the interest rates were sky high, so real estate was not good. And I had worked with all these attorneys, and I thought, well, I could do that. I'll go to law school and I'll do real estate law. So I went to law school. By the end of law school, I had other interests besides real estate law, and I ended up choosing a law firm based on the people in geography, and chose one in California, partly because I was over 30, and in California it was more casual, and you didn't have to call the senior partner Mr. just because you were a junior.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went to California and I started practicing law with a big firm, did a little of everything, and I did that and then I got married and had my first child about a year and a half later. And after she was born, I took a maternity leave, and then I went back, but I went back on what was called 3/4 time. And so I had childcare for her a couple days a week, and I was going to be working 3 long days a week. That didn't work so well because a lot of what I was doing, I was writing briefs that would need to be filed with court, and there was a deadline, and the senior partner I was being supervised for might not be available on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday that I was. And so I ended up being there sometimes. I'd go home and pick up my child at childcare, and then go home and have dinner, and then I'd leave and go back to the office and stay until 3 in the morning in order to get it done. So it was 3/4 time, but it was ridiculous hours.
Wow.
And so that didn't work. So when I became pregnant with my second child, I thought, I'm going to leave this. I'm not going to be on proper partnership track anyway with this part-time stuff, and with 2 kids, it's just too tough. So I stopped practicing law from when my second child was born until she went to pre-K. And when she went to pre-K at 4 years old, I got a call from somebody who asked if I would freelance for him as a contract attorney. That doesn't mean on contracts. It means, you know what it means. But
yes, you're getting paid by the hour, basically, to do work.
Right.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I was hesitant, and he said to me, I'm not asking you to marry me. You can give it a try and see how it works. So I did, and it turned out to be great. He was in commercial litigation. I would have never really picked litigation as my thing to do, but it turned out to be great because he was a fantastic trial lawyer. really great on his feet, really great with clients, and he hated to do research or writing. And I liked doing research and writing. In fact, I really loved writing briefs. And so we were a really good team. And I did do Law and Motion type appearances and maybe went to 1 or 2 trials. But for the most part, he did all the trial work, and I was just doing that. The other, so, and I would work almost every day, but I would make it to pick up my kids by the time they were of the carpool line at 3 o'clock, except 1 day a week. I had help 1 day a week so that I could have one day that I didn't have a deadline, that I could stay as late as I wanted to. And then some of the work ended up being receivership work, and for people who owned apartment buildings and they were being foreclosed upon. And so that work involved a lot of end-of-the-month things. So the last week of the month, I might have a 60, even 70, 80-hour week sometimes. Wow. But the following week, I wouldn't work at all. And my kids got used to the schedule. Okay, this is that week that we don't see much of Mom, but next week she's going to be around all the time. Yeah. So that worked out pretty well. But then my husband got a job in Northern California, and we needed to move. And we also decided, as the kids were then approaching 10 and 12 years old, that it was time to have one parent not working so hard, because he was going to be traveling a lot, absent a lot, and one of our daughters had learning differences, and she really needed me to advocate for her and, take her for some tutoring and things like that. So being a mom trumped being an attorney at that point.
Got it. So and through these years, the early years with your kids and being an attorney, and I know what hard work that can be just from my own experience. Where was Chris, like the real Chris, the Chris that is on fire and the creative Chris? Was she anywhere to be found?
There was certainly a lot of burnout happening, but I was on a spiritual quest too. I had been raised in a faith, and I left it when I was in college, and I rediscovered it in the delivery room when my first child was born. They put that child on top of me after she was delivered, after a pretty serious delivery, and I just said, this can't just be an egg and a sperm and differentiating cells in biology. There's got to be a God, because this is too much of a miracle. Yeah. So I began a spiritual quest. I wasn't really ready to jump right back into what I had left in my 20s, at 20. So I spent a number of years on a spiritual journey. I did a lot of reading. I got involved with groups. I was involved in mothers groups at church with other women. And so that's what I was doing for myself at the time. Nothing so creative, but I was doing a lot of reading, exploring, and thinking, and meeting with other women.
So what was this? Did you feel this yearning to be connected to something greater in some way, or why were you on this journey?
Because I had ignored it and realized at the birth of this child that there was something sacred, and I wanted that. Yeah, it was. I think it was always in me, and I had just stuffed it for a while, or just was being independent. But yeah, there was a yearning, I think, inside that needed to be satisfied. And
so as you continued and continue on this journey, did it make a difference in how different things in your life started to unfold?
Yes, I became more aware of some of my, I became aware of the aspects of me that I didn't like. Was one of them. I was really very much of a perfectionist, and that can serve you well in the practice of law. And I did sew clothes for my kids because I had grown up sewing, and so that was a little bit of a creative outlet, and so I would sew for the kids, and that was fun. But then they didn't like that it didn't have a Gap label or an Esprit label or something. So that kind of put an end to that. But yeah, I was really getting pretty burned out, and I knew I had needs that weren't being satisfied, but I was on the treadmill. I mean, I was going really all the time. Um, Also, as sort of a perfectionist and kind of an overachiever type, I wanted to do everything in my life excellently, my best, and that included parenting. So I took a lot of parenting classes. I read parenting books. I wanted to do parenting right, uh, as if there is one way that is the right way to parent. But I really wanted to do that. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to spend time in my kids' classroom, be an involved parent in their school. And my my older daughter was going to a school, a private school, that really wanted to limit parents in the classroom. But they had a once-a-year fundraiser auction, and they were making a quilt to raise money using the kids' artwork in the quilt. And they were looking for volunteers who had a portable sewing machine and could come into the classroom and help the kids stitch these squares together. So I volunteered as part of I'm going to be the best I can be. I'm going to be a good mom in the classroom. And I went in to help them make this quilt. And hey, I thought that was really fun. And I enjoyed being with the kids and in the classroom, but I also thought, hey, making a quilt is a really cool thing. And the quilts we were making had the kids' artwork on them. So I decided for Christmas that year that in secret, my kids and I would make some quilts for their grandparents and their dad as gifts. And so I went to the quilt store to buy some fabric, and lo and behold, I walked through the store and I was inspired by all these different quilts, and they had classes, and so I decided to buy some more fabric and take a class. And suddenly I was what I called, addicted. Mm-hmm. And I realize now that addiction sounds like something unhealthy, but I think what it was that there really was this need and longing inside of me to do something creative that would fill my well and give me something, really an antidote to all the other work and striving that I was doing. And so it wasn't really an unhealthy addiction. It was, my heart's longing had found something that was going to satisfy it. So I started to quilt. I didn't have a big studio. I quilted on the dining room table, and people would say to me, how can you be adding a hobby when you have no time as it is? And I would say, this is what keeps me sane. This is what really I need more than anything, because after school, as I mentioned, I always picked up the kids at carpool. So I was there in the afternoon and for dinner. But so after school, I would often go into the dining room and I'd be cutting strips of fabric, or I would be sewing things together. Sometimes I'd be doing it by machine, sometimes by hand. But my kids would come into the room and see if they could help or give me an opinion on what colors went together. And then they'd just sit down and they'd tell me about their day. And I could completely listen and not, I was multitasking, but I was doing mindless stuff with the quilting. I was just cutting or sewing straight lines, and I could really easily pay attention to my kids. So it was a wonderful time for us to be able to talk and for them to have my attention and me to hear what was really going on in their lives. So it opened a door that was really needed that way. And then sometimes after dinner and after they were in bed, I'd go back in there and I'd work on it some more, maybe the stuff that took a little bit more concentration. And I just found that was satisfying my need to be doing something for me. And what I found was that I was a go, go, go person. And this activity is slow and quiet. And that's what I needed. It was the little be still and know that I am God time was happening for me while I was quilting, because I would sit there and my mind, it's like meditation. My
Yeah.
mind would be emptied of all of the thinking and actual, analytics and problem solving that you might do during the day, because I'd be thinking about whether, this green looked good next to that purple. And that's all I had in my mind, and it was kind of right brain stuff. But suddenly, insights would pop into my mind, or answers to solutions to problems that I wasn't even specifically asking, but I was living with.
Yes.
So I was just getting, I call that spirit at work.
Yes.
I was getting this stuff because I was quiet and still.
That's amazing. And I know for myself it's difficult to find that quiet time. It's really important. I make a point of at least 10 minutes every day sitting quietly in the morning. I wish there were more time, but how can people, meditation, quote, meditation, sitting quietly isn't for everybody, but as a coach, a spirituality and creativity coach, how can people get into touch with something that feeds their passion or that they're passionate about, and maybe reach a point where they're getting some of the benefits that you just described? Where they start? I mean, is working out, is that creative? I mean, because a lot of people work out and that's their passion and they do it. I mean, what are your thoughts and where do people start?
Well, actually, I think one place to start is you probably need to at least take a little bit of time to be quiet to start. I happen to love journaling, and having a piece of paper helps me to get stuff out of me, but it's not for everybody. But if you take a little bit of time and just use your memory and your imagination to think about what you loved to do as a kid. And because a lot of this creativity comes from things that we're born with. And I believe we're all, it's biblical that there's a longing that's planted in our heart, and that we're created for a specific purpose. We're God's handiwork. And if people don't believe in God, that's fine too, but I think there's some kind of a creative source there, that we're born with some kind of a purpose and heart's desires and things like that. I think that those things there are seeds of those things from early on. So for example, in my life, I learned to sew standing on the back of my mom's chair when I was a toddler, because to be an at-home mom in the 50s, she took in sewing, and she was a seamstress, and she made draperies and stuff like that. So I was used to sewing and fabric, and I learned to sew early on. And then I made doll clothes, or I made pretend furniture out of cereal boxes or whatever. I liked some kind of crafty things. But I also enjoyed writing, and that was a little bit later, but I always thought it was fun to kind of make up stories or pretend like I was writing a newspaper for the neighborhood or something like that. So, and I liked being with my girlfriends and stuff. So the seeds of what I do today were there way back then. So I think it's good to sort of look at what you enjoyed, because I think sometimes the creative passions come from putting together several things that you used to do. And like you and I both put together creativity and spirituality. That to me that's a pretty natural connection. But that's not how everyone's going to see it. But and creativity can certainly come from many, many different things. There's gardening. There's we have to feed ourselves, but sometimes for some people, putting together a meal is very creative. For others, it's occasionally creative. Maybe 5 nights a week they throw it on the table, but a couple nights a week they make it beautiful and special. So that's creative. I think you can find creativity in your work. Certainly, entrepreneurs are very creative. If you like practicing law, you have to come up with your arguments, your points, your creative solutions and negotiations. That's very creative. So I think we need to broaden our view of creativity and look at what do we do where we kind of bring our unique gifts and talents into it, or also look at what do people compliment you about. For example, I used to get complimented about how organized I was. Well, I have a little gift for organization. You know, if I wanted to, I suppose I could do something creative with organizing.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen to be something that turns me on as much as quilting or writing, but there are so many different creative things. It can be indoors, outdoors, alone with other people, dance, music, performance, theater, you know, so many different ways.
And I think those are great jumping off points for people. And I have a question. You know, I think we have a lot of women listeners, and if there were any men listening, I'm hoping we haven't lost them in this episode, you know, but, you know, I feel like, and it's just my opinion, I could be completely wrong about it, you know, and I feel like, at least with the men that I'm around in my life, you know, they have more difficulty kind of getting in touch with their creativity. And I'm not, you know, I don't know if that is an experience that you share, or if you have any observations, and if you have any ideas specific to men in terms of tapping into that.
You know, I think a lot of men get interested in things like architecture, landscape architecture, or building, construction. Certainly engineers are pretty creative. And I said before, I think entrepreneurs or negotiators are creative. I actually was interviewed on a radio program, and it turned by a husband and wife team. It turns out that the man had learned to quilt when he was a kid, and he had never admitted it to his wife or other people, but he had found it to be extremely therapeutic, and he didn't admit it. There are men in the quilting world, but I'm not suggesting that that's, you know, the way for men. I think a lot of men also enjoy writing. Yeah. I know attorneys who, you know, write novels or children's fiction.
Yeah.
So
it's, you know, and just on a side note, my dad, my mom just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary recently, and I found out, like in the course of doing research to put together a presentation, that my dad is actually the one who taught my mom how to sew, which was shocking, you know. So that's really interesting.
I also recently went to a car show with vintage cars. Boy, there's a lot of creativity going on with men around things like collections, vintage cars as an example.
For sure. So what can this open up for people? I mean, you've listed the insights that you have personally when you're in the middle of your creative process. What else can it open up for people getting into touch with their creativity, and how do you think it can change a life?
Well, I think some of the things, I've written a book, it's called Reap As You Sow, Spirit at Work in Quilt Making. And the reap as you sow refers to, I think there's lots of rewards that you can reap as you're doing something creative. In my case, happens to be sewing. But I think they can fall into categories of individual benefits and then interpersonal as well as communal. So I think in creativity, for one thing, it allows self-expression. And your self-expression can be therapeutic in just getting stuff out that you need to get out of you. But it can also serve a purpose and a calling. I have a friend, and one of the stories in the book is about a woman whose textile art is all about social justice and activism. So she is doing that. She's creating something that is a piece of art, but her mission is to create awareness of social justice issues. And so that's what her work does. She publicly displays her work a lot. She's very well known, but she's promoting causes. I know other people who do that, and they're, you know, they may have a different cause. There are Alzheimer's quilts to raise money for cures to Alzheimer's. There are many quilters who make quilts for wounded warriors and vets, and abused children who are being taken from their homes and they need something for comfort. So there are ways that you can use a creative outlet to serve society, to advocate for causes, to raise money for causes. And then also just, it's a wonderful way to connect, because whatever your interest is that you're pursuing, your passion, outside of just, whatever this special passion is, you connect to other people who have that same passion. It's great for friendships. And of course, I think friendships are one of the most sustaining things there is in life. We're not in this by ourselves, and to have good friendships that are based on a common interest is really important.
Yeah, those are great tips, Chris. And one observation that I have about myself is that being an attorney for many years before I had my first child, I was really stuck into the go and research and writing and left brain. And when I had my baby, I really, it was weird for me to talk the goo goo gaga talk, and sing to her. I felt so unnatural and uncomfortable for me. And I realized then at how disconnected I'd become from that part of myself. But I think like the act of creation, meaning giving birth to her, really was a rebirth for my own creativity. And I've gotten back into touch with writing, and we sing and we dance and we play, and so one idea that I have for people is to watch children and look at children and play like children play, because that's been really healing for me. So that's just an observation.
I think you're right on with that, but I would go a step further and say we don't need to. It's great to do that, playing with children or observing children, but we all have an inner child too, and it's really important that we let our inner child play. So that's one of the big things about creativity coaching is we'll look at tasks or interests or something you might want to do, and we ask a lot of questions. So one of the questions is, what would make this more fun? What would make this easier? What part of this brings me joy? And really tap into that childlike part of ourselves. And that's really healthy, and it's really enjoyable.
Okay, so that's excellent. And that's, I think for somebody who's feeling this longing and disconnection, that's a great step. And, you're the one to call. And I don't know how, so tell us about your book, Chris. It's about time to end. Tell us about the book and, a little more about the book, and then what you do and how you can help people.
Okay. The book is a collection, it's 13 chapters, and each chapter is basically pretty much a standalone story, although there's a thread that runs through the whole thing. I started off writing about how quilting affected me spiritually and otherwise, but I expanded it, and I interviewed other women, and so there are 9 different quilters featured in the book, and they're women of different faiths and spiritual belief systems, because I wanted it to be universally about spirit at work in this creative endeavor. And it has 90 color photos of quilts. Well, not all of them are quilts. 90 color photos, many of them of quilts. And the quilts, a lot of people think of quilts as those patchwork things you put on beds, but I'm not talking that. I am talking about that, but as well I'm talking about art quilts, things that you put on the wall. And and then each of the chapters of the book is followed by a couple of pages of a little workbook type section that has practical exercises that you can do to enhance your creativity and enhance the spiritual aspect of your creative practice, particularly quilting. But I've had many, many people read the book who are not quilters. I think it appeals especially to women. All of the quilters in it are women, and the issues involve a lot of women's issues. And each of these stories, because they're poignant stories, and they're from a heart level, so they deal with a lot of issues they're pretty universal issues. So anyway, that's the book, It just came out in September, and I'm very excited about sharing it. And I'm going to be doing some online type teleclasses or book discussion groups or workshops using some of the practical steps. So that's that. The creativity coaching aspect of what I do, I've had several different kinds of training, and some of them involve really specific tools that you can apply, and they can actually be applied to any problem. It doesn't even have to really even be creativity, but it's a creative approach to how you can take something that's a goal or a desire where you're having a problem. And it's basically geared to help people overcome resistance, which could be procrastination, overwhelming circumstances, too much to do, stress, sort of chaos in their lives, perfectionism that is so strong it's crippling, sometimes self-sabotage because of issues you've had from early childhood. So we deal with all that stuff and figure out, often by breaking things down into small steps and overcoming some unrealistic expectations and learning to reframe how we look at things, how we can solve these problems and help people to be not only more creative, but more to accomplish their creative dreams and goals and other dreams and goals. And part of my other coaching training was from a more spiritual aspect. I've been trained as a spiritual director as well, and that is to look at what are you here for. And we touched on that a little bit earlier, but that's really a good thing to do in coaching also, to take and to be guided toward how to work with yourself on that and figuring out what is your purpose. And often it can be doing the same thing you're already doing, but doing it with a different attitude.
Yes.
Or, it might be doing what you're doing, but adding something more playful and creative on the side. Or it could be transitioning from what you're doing into making your passions into your life work and feeling like you're doing what you're called to do, using the special gifts and talents you were born with. So I love to do that, that kind of coaching also.
Oh, that's amazing. It sounds great, Chris. And I'm going to buy the book, not just for me, but for a couple of special ladies who love crafting in my life, and I know they're going to love it. And, I think you have a lot to offer people who want to get more in touch with some different things in their life. So really, I'm so happy that you shared your time with us. And can you please tell people how they can find you? And I'm going to share this information, too, in the show notes for the podcast episode.
Okay, I have two different websites, but they're linked. So probably the easiest thing is www.reapasusow.com. And sow is spelled S-E-W. So reapasusow.com. And from there's a link to the creativity coaching website, and you can buy the book there. It's also available all over online or in bookstores. It might not be on the shelves in the bookstores, but anybody can get it because it's got a big national distributor. And awesome. That's fine. That's it.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, so everybody, there you have it for this episode of the Family Law Insider Podcast. Be sure and check out Chris. I think she can propel you to a different level in your life. And remember, until next time, we're on your side when it matters most. Thanks.